Benjamin Franklin, long ago, before we ever thought about the need for conserving water or water scarcity was a problem in the world, said when the well is empty, we learn the worth of water. And what's happening today, in effect, is that in many parts of the world, the global well is starting to go empty. And we're learning the hard way what the worth of water is.
Well, so there's clearly a conflict coming. Who's going to be the ultimate arbiter? Is it going to be the United Nations? Is it going to be the World Trade Organization? Or is it going to be the ones with the biggest bombs?
Well, what's happening is, on the Tigris-Euphrates in particular, there is no treaty. The Syrians have tried in the past to try to get some leverage with the Turks by supporting some of the terrorist groups that operated in Turkey to try to get independence movements in Turkey. That led to some various negotiations. They had the tanks have been pulled out and faced each other across the borders from the past, but everybody has always come back and averted the warfare. But at this stage, there is not only is no treaty, but the Turks are saying, look, you didn't tell us, we don't tell you how to manage your oil, and you aren't going to tell us how to manage our water. And the World Bank has been, however, involved in other regions of the world, trying to work on stakeholder arrangements, if you will, agreements, sometimes with success. There's a negotiation going on right now in the Nile Basin, where Egypt has disproportionately used the waters of the Nile for its civilization from ancient times to the current times. And now the upriver states, particularly Ethiopia, which supplies 85% of the water that eventually reaches Egypt, is starting to try to develop some of, use some of that water for its own development. It's one of the poorest countries in the world. And the Egyptian society needs that water. So it's a very tense situation there.
So water being the new oil, let's get back to that.
Yeah. Water is overtaking oil as the scarcest critical resource in the planet. In fact, it's really getting back to what has always been its historical primacy as the primary resource. And in fact, it is more valuable and more indispensable than oil, because you can't drink oil and you can't grow food, and you can't grow food with it.
Yeah.
But just as oil transformed the politics and the economics and the environment and our daily lives in the 20th century, water is transforming our world in the 21st century in the similar ways. It's changing the geopolitics of the planet. We are seeing more and more countries beginning to form alliances based on other countries that, for example, the Saudi Arabians are buying farmland or leasing farmland in the Nile and in Pakistan because they don't have enough water to grow the food that they need. So we're going to be seeing some of the alliances of the world being shaped by this. China has 1/5 the amount of water per person as the United States does. It is one of its critical Achilles heels of this great economic juggernaut that they've launched. But it could, in fact, be and they recognize it, could become one of the factors that impedes their ability to achieve the goals that they've set out for themselves. It's driven them also in the quest for energy resources to begin to dam rivers in the Tibetan Plateau, which is the headwaters of virtually all the great rivers of Asia. And they are building dams up on the Mekong and on the Brahmaputra that are going to have downstream effects very, very shortly on the nations that live on those rivers. So, and that's 1.5 billion people live on the waters that are affected by the Tibetan Plateau. China has enormous pollution problems. They only were able to treat 1/5 the amount of wastewater that they produce. Some of the water is so polluted they can't use it even in their factories, much less even for agricultural purposes. So water will affect the large-scale geopolitical balances as well, even in that means. One of the great concerns that I have, that many people have, is that for years, Pakistan and India, for example, have been mining groundwater from deeper and deeper aquifers, much faster than the water replenishes there, and they are now hitting the bottom of those aquifers, so that they will no longer be able to produce the irrigation water that they need to be able to feed their populations. So that Pakistan and India almost surely are going in to become food importing countries. China too is hanging in the balance of whether it can continue to feed its population.
Do those countries have the wealth to be able to import all the food that they need?
They do, but what will happen in world food markets, being what they are, is that will crowd out the poorer countries. Now, the Middle East imports 50% of its food today. It's going to be rising to 70%. But there are countries, other countries that don't have even oil wealth or other means to produce. So at the very least, food prices are going to become probably going to be rising and becoming much more volatile, and that itself is a huge geopolitical problem for all of us, because that creates riots and instability. The French Revolution was caused partly by shortages of bread. They've had the riots in Egypt over that. If you remember in 2008, the UN and the World Bank were quite concerned because of the very sharp spike in grain prices.
Are politicians ready to address the water crisis? I mean, have they been ready throughout history to address the water crisis, particularly in London we were talking before?
Right. No, they're pretty much ignorant of the problem. Everybody looks at it pretty much in their national framework. Certainly, some countries have made great adaptations. I must say, Australia has gone through a horrific drought, 10-year drought. Fortunately, they were able at the outset, even before that, to begin to reform their water regime in the Murray-Darling Basin, and tore up, in effect, the water rights, the old existing water rights rules, and rewrote them, and now have a system where there's tradable water rights. The government buys enough water at the outset to maintain the integrity of the ecosystem itself, and then the farmers and other users bid for the water after that, and it creates has created a very efficient market for water. This is one of the more hopeful signs that can be emulated parts of the western parts of the United States, perhaps, which has similar background and similar laws to what Australia did. They have been able, despite a 70% drop in the amount of water that's running through that ecosystem, to be able to maintain the same level of agricultural production value. Different products, different crops, but nevertheless going through what otherwise would have been a trauma of epic proportions to come through with a reasonable adjustment to that crisis. Other countries, however, and Israel has also made some progress in recycling and reusing water, which is a very large trend also around many of the industrial countries of the world. They have purple pipes running through the countries that they don't have to necessarily upgrade the water quality to the highest drinking level.
Purple pipes?
They call them purple pipes, but it basically means that the water is not potable. You've upgraded it, but you haven't spent all the money and all the energy that goes into producing that extra clean water for drinking level, because you're not using it for purposes that you need people to drink it. You can use it for growing things that maybe that we don't eat. You can use it for flushing toilets. I mean, there are many things that we don't need it for.
Now, you went on a water project yourself in Kenya.
Yeah, in 2004. I went to rural Kenya to work on a water project where we laid water pipes, 2 kilometers of water pipes, to connect a borehole, a well, to a village, so that the villagers no longer had to walk so many hours each day collecting and fetching water. This was a project organized by my wife, who was a school teacher, and she got into it and interested in it because of the gender equity issues involved.
I mean, because it was always women that were carrying water?
Because largely it was women. She was, and it's a human geography aspect to this. And of course, when we got to rural Kenya, it's on the Tanzania border, we raised about $5,000 for these pipes and a large water, not even that large, a water tower that could be laid at a elevated level, and therefore when the pipes, other pipes could be laid from it to gravity feed water throughout the region. As I say, it cost about $5,000 for these pipes. It began to service water for about 1,000 or so people. Now these people each day, because we were there finishing the laying of the water pipes, and I can tell you how thrilled they were when we have footage on it, when the water tap turned on for the first time, because it meant that these villagers who were walking several hours every day, I mean at least 2 to 3 hours every day, carrying these jerry cans, which are very heavy. I mean, water weighs 8 1/3 pounds per gallon, and it's 20% more than oil, by the way. Oh. And if you, for a family of 5, if you're going to carry the 5 gallons that is sort of the most minimal needs that you need, you're talking about 200 pounds, carrying that for a couple of kilometers each day. You don't do it in one trip, it takes several trips. So they load the bicycles, they load the donkeys, they carry it themselves. The kids spend half their days doing it, mostly women and children. The children obviously don't go to school as a result of that, or losing school time, and the women are losing opportunities to make productive work. This, I think, gets to the heart of what really is at the root of the water crisis. It isn't that there isn't enough water very often in some of these places. It is that the organization, the institutions and the governance is not sufficient. It doesn't exist.